just a few moments, we're going to spend some time talking about Rahab. Spend some time talking about some of the lessons and things that we can gain in relationship to examining the account, particularly in Joshua chapter 2, in relationship to this woman of faith. In the text that Aaron just read for us in Hebrews chapter 11, it reminds us of two individuals that are somewhat connected. Moses, by faith, led the people out of Egypt and challenged them to strive to honor God. We know that they complained and murmured, and that caused them difficulties. 40 years transpired. And ultimately, Joshua and Caleb will lead the people into the promised land, and Jericho is the location in which they will make that effort occur at the beginning, and Rahab will be of an assistance to that process. And so if you want to open your Bibles to Joshua chapter 2, in just a moment we'll kind of dig in to that message, and we'll bounce out of that text a little bit throughout tonight, but we'll spend a lot of time right there in that particular chapter. Do want to appreciate all those who are here tonight. I know our numbers are a little bit down with colds and flus and some folks that are traveling preaching today and different things, but we're certainly glad that you are here, and if you're watching at home, we're thankful for you as well, and appreciate the fact that you've taken time to study with us tonight. Something new, and I'll speak to those at home for a moment, because you all always get to see what's on the screen, but we have actually figured out a way that the folks at home can actually watch what's going on the screen as well, and they can see the charts and slides come up. And hopefully, I'll put the first one up here, Samuel, and we'll be rolling with that tonight, and hopefully that'll be a benefit. And if Sam will, never mind. I'll just assume he's got it back there. I was hoping to catch his eyes. But hopefully, folks at home will be able to follow along with that. I was looking at some numbers this morning, and you're always encouraged when people are listening and watching, because that means the gospel's getting out, and folks are having opportunities to hear the message. And those numbers were up a little bit, and I was kind of excited about that. And then I looked and saw that the new Star Wars trailer had 45 million views, and I didn't think much at all about anything that I'd done. It'll shrink your ego in a hurry when you realize the millions and millions that are watching R2-D2 and CH2O or whatever that is, and those kinds of things. But I'm glad that there are some folks interested in spiritual things and take time to study with us at home. And somebody actually sent me an email the other day and thanked me for mentioning those who were at home. It was actually from somebody out of state. But at any rate, I appreciate the opportunities that we have to share the message of God's Word. Here in Joshua chapter 2, in relationship to Rahab, let me give you a quick background reminder here in relationship to her. Remember, we're talking about Jericho, a walled city, and where the people are going to have some help from God. In fact, they're going to have God completely in order to be able to overcome this fortified city as they begin the conquest of the promised land. Rahab is going to be an integral part of that effort, and she's an unlikely source for that, and we'll see that before we're done this evening. But she ultimately then will become part of the lineage of Jesus. Matthew actually states that she was the mother of Boaz, the husband of Ruth. You remember those two, right? Ruth had taken a husband, and she stays with her mother-in-law, and then after her husband dies, they return back to her mother-in-law's homeland, and Ruth meets up with Boaz, and he cares for her. There's some interesting stories we could account in relationship to Ruth as well, but it is stated that in Matthew's account that Rahab was the mother of Boaz, the husband of Ruth. And also in Matthew's account of the lineage, you'll see her, if I did the math right, as the great-great-grandmother of David. Sometimes those are somewhat hard, because there are moments where they'll say something like, and he did this after his father David, where it might be actually a generation or two in between that particular individual. But at any rate, she is very intricately noted as part of the lineage that ultimately we receive Jesus from. And again, as we'll see in a few moments, she's an unlikely source for that. She is one of 4 women mentioned by Matthew in the lineage. Rarely, sorry ladies, it's just the way it was, they generally didn't talk about the women in the lineage of people. The important factors were generally focused upon who were the men. And that's just the way they accounted for things. Right or wrong, good or bad, anyway, I can't change history, that's the way they did it. But I find it interesting that the Bible writers, Matthew in his recording of this, took note and wanted to emphasize at least 4 different women who were part of this lineage that ultimately Jesus would come. And Rahab is part of that listing. I want us to appreciate as well that she had an interesting life. Here was a woman that we could simply define as a sinner. And yet she became an example of faith. In the text that Aaron read in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, it was by faith that Rahab did the things that she did. It was by faith that she had the courage to hide the spies, to send the king's men off on a wild goose chase, and to do the things that she did in order to protect the plan of God in relationship to His overcoming of Jericho. In fact, I think that we could fairly define it as an act of faith. Let me run you out of Joshua before I even got to Joshua 2, but let me run you out of it for a second. Take your marker and mark Joshua 2 if you want. I'll be back there in just a moment. But I want you to notice James chapter 2 and verse 25, because I believe this kind of defines who Rahab is. In James chapter 2 and verse 25, he said, "Likewise was not Rahab the harlot," and I don't think I need to go into any greater definition than that. I think you understand what we're talking about there, do you not? That here is a woman of ill repute. This is not somebody that you would necessarily think was going to become a person of faith, let alone somebody who is repeatedly mentioned in the Bible as a person of faith. I want you to think about that. She went from pretty drastic issues. She went from pretty serious kinds of sins and practices to not just becoming a believer in God, but becoming an active believer in God, whose history the Bible records on many occasions as being one as an example of active faith. Likewise was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works, when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. Hebrews 11 speaks about her faith and her conviction and her belief and how that aided her. James reminds us that faith actively did the things that were necessary. That faith and works are a perfect example found in Rahab. Active faith that we see in her life. And recognize as well that her past sins did not hinder her from becoming this example of faith. Your past sins don't hinder you from becoming an example of faith. Do not become victim of who you once were, in other words. You don't have to remain the same person, number one. You don't have to remain the same challenged and sinful person. And what greater way for the Bible to illustrate that to us than to take somebody like this, like Rahab, whose circumstances very serious in relationship to her sins, and turn her into a spiritual beacon of light, an example of faith. You can be that too. Your sins can be forgiven. We can seek the relationship with God that He would desire from us, and we too can be an example of faith that others can look to if we will get beyond our sins and find the remission that is found in Jesus Christ. So let's look at this scene now that's here in Jericho and remind ourselves of what's happening. Just shortly before, God is going to give the city over into the hands of the Israelites, as was the case in several moments throughout their history. He determined that they should send some spies in to spy out the land. Now, I've often wondered, it's kind of curious, isn't it, at least to me, that I believe He sends 2 spies into Jericho. What's interesting to me is that if you recall, when they sent spies into the Promised Land the first time, they sent how many? They sent 12, right? And when they returned, 10 of them gave an evil report, and 2 of them gave a positive report. Just interesting anecdote, just to think about for a moment, that when this occasion occurs, what do? They send just 2. They send the 2 spies in to spy out the land, and just give it some thought. It doesn't mean necessarily anything, but it's interesting to note that that's the occasion that we're at. The king of Jericho has become aware of the spies and began an extensive search to try to find them. The king finds out. Now remember, the people have been kind of camped outside of Jericho for a while. Ultimately, they're going to come across Jordan. And when they do that, that means they're going to be even closer than they had been before. Word is spreading about these people that have been kind of camped on the doorstep of Jericho for quite a while. And now it's gotten beyond that to where the king is aware that there are spies among him. That there are some from those Israelites who are searching out his kingdom. And so Rahab hid the spies. And she refused to give up their whereabouts, as you found out. Agreement was made that she and her family would be protected, that they would find safety through all of those things. But let's look at some of the details that come up in the process. In Joshua chapter 2 and in verse 1, notice that he said, Now Joshua the son of Nun sent out two men from Acacia Grove to spy out secretly, saying, Go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came to the house of a harlot named Rahab and lodged there. Now it's interesting to note, these spies aren't kind of on the run initially. Obviously you're trying to not be made aware of, and you're trying to do your work and spy out the land. And notice that they're not just given the job to go into Jericho alone. These spies were given the responsibility to go look, and then he said, and especially go take a look at Jericho. And if you're a fortified city, you're a walled city, right? And so these two spies are going to have to try to find some way to inconspicuously enter into this fortified city. Can you imagine for a moment being one of those spies and having to try to get through that gate, or whatever means by which they use to enter into the city, and not be known and not be caught and not be found out? And the nervousness that must have created. But they find a way. And it is interesting to me that they choose the house of a harlot in which to lodge. Now, there's all kinds of thoughts that might come to your mind. Maybe it's because, for lack of a better to define it, people are coming and going all the time from that kind of place, right? To, again, put it mildly, that there wouldn't be anything unusual to see people coming and going from a place like that. There wouldn't be anything unusual from seeing more than one individual coming and going from that location. And so maybe it makes sense from that point of view. Maybe they figure in their mind that somehow they will be able to stay less known, but just kind of blending in by this circumstance. But let me also suggest to you that this is a great picture of exactly what Jesus was going to do when He arrived on the scene. When Jesus arrives, what message does He bring? He says, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. Who are the lost? Those are the sinners. What was one of the great criticisms that Jesus received while He walked among men? One of the greatest things that Jesus was accused of was that He was always hanging out with sinners. What kind of man of God could this be? What kind of good can come from this man? Why should we listen to Him? He's always seemingly sitting around a table somewhere with sinners. And maybe it's because Jesus recognized who has need and who doesn't think they have need. Jesus was able to discern that there are those who were looking for something better. The sinners that He would associate with were possibly looking to turn and change. Here's Rahab, and in God's wisdom, He sees somebody. God doesn't just see a harlot. What God sees is somebody who is ready for change. What God sees is somebody ready to turn and repent, become a person of faith. We don't always see what's really there sometimes. Sometimes we look at circumstances and say, that's an impossibility. There's no way to reach those people with the gospel. There's no way to reach these individuals with the gospel. That somehow we've determined that there's a handful of types of sins that people are committing, and they'll never turn or change from those things. Well, can we just look at Rahab for half a second and recognize that God saw something in her? And it wasn't that she was a harlot, it was that she was primed and ready for change. He saw a person of faith just waiting to happen. And He uses this circumstance to bring benefit to His plan. God's involved. God knows who it is in Jericho that will really assist Him. God knows who it is that will help and aid these spies that have been sent into the land. And He knows who's going to fulfill the purposes that are before Him. And so He chooses, through the spies, Rahab the harlot. Let me share with you, though, also some further thought into what she did and how she examined or exemplified her faith. Notice in verse 2, and it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, men have come here tonight from the children of Israel to search out the country. So the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the country. Can I suggest to you how serious that is? Number one, this text illustrates that the king knew where to look. Okay? He's not, it seems from the language that this is not a let's just go door to door and knock and see whether we happen to stumble across the spies. He specifically sends, he gets word that there are spies among us. There are Israelite spies among us, king. Well, where did you see them? We think they're over there at Rahab's house. He doesn't say he sent a door-to-door posse out there to try to figure out where they were. He specifically sends men to Rahab's house. He knows where they were seen. There are enough people among the kingdom, I'm sure. There are enough people within the city who honor the king, who, if they saw certain things, would tell him what was going on. So the king knows where to look. And when he comes demanding, wanting to know where these men are, she's going to have to reject the direct command of the king, who had life and death in his hands. Rahab's taking a tremendous risk here. By Rahab honoring her convictions and faith in God, she is putting her life at risk. By not honoring what the king has said, I want the spies. Her belief in Jehovah has convinced her that to not honor Him would leave her hopeless. She recognizes to not honor God in this circumstance and to go ahead and turn them over to the king would not benefit her and would leave her in a hopeless circumstance. And so she goes the extra mile to hide the spies and then send the pursuers on a false hunt. It's always been interesting to me. The easiest way out in many ways would have just been to say, I'm sorry guys, I tried to hide you, but the king's men are here at the door, and so there they are, right? But she goes the extra mile. That's what people of faith do. People of faith don't say, well, that'll do, right? People of faith don't just kind of do a handful of things and become very contented very quickly. People of faith go the extra mile. Rahab doesn't stop when the king's men are knocking at the door saying, we know they came here, you need to send them out to us. She doesn't stop by just initially hiding. She hides them deeper. She says, well, you guys need to go look for them here. She's going to send them in a different direction. Her example of faith is tremendous because she goes the extra mile. That's what we need to do as people of faith. I know we call it sometimes preaching to the choir. And what we mean by that is simply this, that sometimes it seems like we're preaching a message to the most faithful that maybe the least faithful really need to be the ones listening to. But can I encourage you tonight to recognize that all of us as people of faith need to go the extra mile irregardless of what others do with their faith. The Lord needs more people willing to go the extra mile who won't look and say, well, that guy ain't doing hardly anything, and oh, over there she's not doing nothing at all. That won't compare themselves to anything but God's standard. I'm going to go the extra mile. That's what I need to say to myself. What would I have done? 2 spies in my house, my life's on the line. I could appease my conscience and just say, well, I tried. Here they are, King. Sorry, guys. Or I can go the extra mile and really put my life on the line for a greater purpose and good. People of faith go the extra mile in their service to God. Jump down to verse 9. I want you to notice something else about her that I in many ways, kind of find fascinating. And she says to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land are faint-hearted because of you. Did you see her language? I know that the Lord has given this land to you. The walls are still standing. The marching hasn't occurred yet. They have not come in and captured, but in Rahab's mind, she has heard enough about the God of those Israelites that are camped out there that in her mind she understands this is done. There is not one thing that any of us here in Jericho can do to stop this. And so Rahab, in a tremendous act of wisdom, says, I better choose wisely here who I align myself with. The victory belongs to God. The victory belongs to your God. In fact, so much so, she says, that all of us here in the city and all along the countryside are really faint-hearted because we know and have heard about the things that have been going on with your God and the things that He's accomplished. They're melting away because of these people that are outside, camped, waiting for the moment. Friends, there has always been something powerful about people who follow God. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 37, that's a familiar text. It may just not jump out at you in terms of verse in Scripture here. But he says, we have been made more than conquerors through Christ who strengthens us. We have been made more than conquerors. Rahab recognized those are conquerors outside the walls of Jericho. Those are people who follow God. He is a great conqueror. Nobody can defeat Him. No one is able to stand against Him. We need to either decide to join or perish. No one is greater than God, my friends. No one is greater than Christ. He makes us more than conquerors. And so choose wisely, and when we're making our decisions of who we will align ourselves with, make very wise decisions because the choice has long-lasting, eternal complications and consequences or reward for us. And remember all the while that you serve a God that for generation after generation after generation, when people are honest about who He is and what He can do, they melt at the thought of trying to challenge Him. And Rahab and others were willing to learn from the facts that were all around them. In verse 10, back to our text in Joshua chapter 2, she said, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea." Isn't that interesting? I thought that was just for children's Bible classes some thousands of years later, right? We didn't really start telling those stories, right, about the parting of the Red Sea and the walking through on dry ground. We've just in recent years, no. Not long, right? Remember, we're not all that far, right? You had Moses, that was Moses leading the people out of Egypt. We had the 40 year of wandering in the wilderness after that, and now we're about to go. And by this period of time, the folks that were around had already been hearing about what kind of things these people had done. And apparently the evidence and the conversations and the facts on the ground were enough that Rahab believes it. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody walked in the building tonight and said, "Hey, fellas, I just watched a couple million people walk across the Ohio River on dry ground," we're going to say what? Well, you got any selfies of that? Because I want to see, right? I got to see something. I'm not just going to take your word. What I'm trying to illustrate to you is that enough people have repeatedly told this account of how they had walked through on dry ground that people in Jericho are melting and are faint-hearted. They believe. Rahab believes the things she had been hearing about God. That she said, "We heard about what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed." We heard about that. Deuteronomy 29. We heard about that. "And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted. Neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath." I long for a day where all men lack the courage to confront God. I don't even know whether courage is the right word to use. That's the word in the text. But what I mean by that is that here were a people who when they heard about the kind of God who was ruling those Israelites outside there, when they heard about what happened to Sihon and Og, when they'd heard about the parting of the Red Sea and the walking through, she says, we don't even have the courage to face that kind of God. We don't have the courage or ability to fight and resist that. But too many men today create a false sense of courage. And they blatantly resist who Jehovah God is. And ultimately will be met with challenge and demise because of that. Rahab is a great example. We've read the stories. We've heard about the things that your God has done. And they were willing to learn from the facts that were on the ground. You know, sometimes we need to be willing to learn from the facts. When the Bible speaks, we need to be educated by it. When the evidences are overwhelming, when we see the truths that cannot be denied, we need to honor it. And I believe that's exactly what was happening amongst the people of Jericho. And so she seeks some help from the God that she now trusts based on the things that she had heard concerning Him. Notice verse 12. Now therefore I beg you, swear to me by the Lord, since I have shown you kindness, that you also will show kindness to my father's house. And give me a true token. And spare my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all that they have. And deliver our lives from death. I suppose we might say that's a reasonable request. Rahab basically says, I have placed my life on the line. It would have been a lot easier for me to just turn you in. I could have faced those kinds of consequences if they had found me out and the difficulties it would brought. All I'm asking in return is that you spare my family when the destruction comes. It's interesting to me that she's concluded that this destruction was coming regardless of what she did. She recognizes that she can't stop it. She's already made that statement. She recognizes there's no reason to try to resist that which is coming. And so she says, can we be spared? We heard how you utterly destroyed Sihon and Og. What I'm asking you is, well, are you willing to spare me for the assistance that I have given you? Are you willing to help me because of what I'm offering? Because it would have been a lot simpler for her to just turn them in. And imagine, you want to turn your reputation around in a heartbeat? She could have gone from the town harlot to town hero in the eyes of the people by saying, yeah, these spies have been here all along. I didn't know who they were. Here they are. Don't think that wouldn't have been a temptation. I believe it had to have been a temptation. For her to consider the value that would bring to her. You know, just as we said earlier about how life-changing it would be for her to turn from that kind of lifestyle and become a person of faith in relationship to God. Well, she could also have had a great change if she had turned them over and become a hero for turning over these spies and maybe, in their minds, thwarting the challenges the Israelites would bring. It would have been a lot simpler, and so she just simply says, I'm going out of the way here to help. Can my family be spared? She acts upon that desire for salvation. There should be an inward part of all of us to want to be saved. Isn't that kind of part of who we are? Why do we go to great lengths? We go to doctor after doctor, and if that doctor can't figure it out, what do? We find another doctor. If that doctor can't figure it out, we find another doctor. And if the first test doesn't figure it out, we take another test. And if that test doesn't figure it out, we take another. Right? What is all that about? That's about preservation of life. That's about trying to figure out how can I save my life. It is very much a part of who we are as people to want to save ourselves. The question is, will I not just have that in a physical sense, but will I recognize the benefit of having that in a spiritual sense as well? A desire for salvation and to do anything and everything necessary in order to receive it. She wants to be saved. She does not want to be destroyed when she knows it's coming. Brother and friend, destruction's coming. Vengeance is mine, I shall repay, saith the Lord. That's Bible. Jesus will come in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon those who obey not the gospel, that know not God and obey not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's coming. The destruction is coming. And it would not be benefit for us to have the courage to try to say, well, I can face that. Our hearts should faint and our lives should melt at the very thought of a powerful God sending His Son in judgment. So what should my response be? In the midst of the fainting heart, in the midst of the melting away at the face of God's judgment, I can say, Lord, how do I get saved? How can I be spared from that? How can I be saved from such a destruction? How can I be saved from such a calamity? And then He says, follow my Son. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right? There should be an inward part of us that wants to be saved. Not just sparing our physical life, but that eternally we would want saved. And turn to the one person who can do that. And it's God. Notice verse 14. So the men answered her, our lives for yours. If none of you tell this business of ours, and it shall be when the Lord has given us the land that we will deal kindly and truly with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the city wall, and she dwelt on the wall. And she said to them, get to the mountain, test the pursuers, or lest the pursuers meet you. Hide there 3 days, until the pursuers have returned. Afterward, you may go your way. So she secures them. She's been offered a promise. God was willing, or God was going to be giving the land over to the Israelites. And she offers them an interesting manner of escape. I don't think it's coincidence, by the way, maybe. Now, go back to our earlier discussion that they picked this location. I don't think it's coincidence that they picked it in relationship to who lived there. And I don't think it's coincidence that they picked it in terms of its location. If you want to escape a walled city in a hurry, where better you be? I better be on the wall, right? I better be in the fastest way to escape a walled city. And it's not through a gate. What do you think's the first thing you fortify? You've got a couple of spies in your walled city. What's the first thing you do? We say, we're going on what? We're locking this place down. Lock this place down. Nobody in or out. We got to find these spies. The only way out is over the wall. Well, it just so happens she lived on the wall, which wasn't uncommon, by the way, around walled cities. And so they escape. And she gives them insight. Again, going above and beyond. She says, go hide here. Wait a few days. The heat will be off. And you'll be able to return back. Again, she goes above and beyond. She wants them to remain secure because it's her only hope. You think about that. She is determined. She's convicted in her mind, destruction coming. Your God's too powerful. We faint at the thought of Him. Jericho's going down. If these spies don't make it back to the Israelites, does that mean the Israelites aren't going to come? Well, I hope not. I guess we can't really answer that because history doesn't play it out that way. But in her mind, they're coming irregardless. But if they don't make it back to camp, they can't tell the leaders and the warriors about this family that should be spared. And so it is her only source of salvation, physically, was to do everything she could to make sure these spies made it back to the camp to inform those there of a family that needed to be spared when they entered into Jericho. It's her only option. Christ is our only option. God is our only option. If we want to be spared, if we want salvation, if we want to have hope, it's our only option. And we need to do anything and everything to secure ourselves in that promise. So they give her some conditional assurances. So the men say to her, verse 17, we will be blameless of this oath of yours which ye have made us swear. unless when we come into the land you bind this line of scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you bring your father, your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household to your own home. So it shall be that whoever goes outside the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head. And we will be guiltless. And whoever is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head, if a hand is laid on it. If you tell this business of ours, then we will be free from your oath, which you made us swear. And then she said, according to your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet cord in the window. They said, we'll make this promise and this covenant, but it's conditional. And we're going to honor this oath, but number one, you better not say anything about it. If we get word back that after we left, you had a change of heart and pointed them in our direction, or gave some kind of warning, the oath is over. You cannot speak about these things. They also said it's conditioned on this. You need to identify your home. We're going to be in the midst of battle, right? The walls are going to fall flat, and we are going to come in a midst of a battle, and we need to be able to quickly identify your house. In fact, we need to be able to quickly identify one location. So they say to her, tell your family members that there's but one location. You're not going to be spared if they decide, well, we'll just stay over here. And when they come knocking on the door, we'll say, well, we're Rahab's cousin. Right? That's not going to work. He says, you need to get them here. There's one location, one place. One Lord, one faith, one hope, one battle. Isn't that what Ephesians chapter 4 says? The singularity of thought. There is but one place, Rahab. We're going to honor this oath. We're going to do what's right. But they better be in there, and you need to identify the location when the warriors come. Stay in your home, no matter what. I want you to stop and think about that. They didn't stay in your home, pop some popcorn, sit back, relax. Right? Stay in your home while a war is being waged outside the door. What's the temptation? The temptation is to run. The temptation is to wonder, do they see the scarlet cord? Are they really going to honor the oath? Is God really going to spare us? Is this really going to work? And, it'd be real easy if you were just sitting inside relaxing, having dinner, and there wasn't this noise of battle. But there's a fight going on outside. The noise of battle has come to town. Stay put, they said. Again, think about the reasonable of that, or the sensible of that. You come running outside that door, what are the Israelites going to think? You came out to what? You came out to fight. That's what everybody else has been doing, right? It's what everybody else would do. They'd come out to fight. Stay inside. That's where the safety is. And don't give in to the temptation to leave the security of that place. Jesus says there's one hope, one faith, one Lord, one battle. There's one place to be. Be with Jesus. That's the place. Stay with Him. Don't leave Him. That's the only place of security spiritually. That's the only place that salvation can come. And I love her words. I realize she wasn't speaking English, but I love the way it comes out in English anyway when she says, so be it. Okay. She understands that she couldn't alter the purposes of God anyway. So be it. We'll identify the house. I'll get them all in here. And I recognize this is the only place that salvation can occur. So be it. And brother and friend, that's the way we need to be as well. We need to have that kind of mindset. God says, here's the place of safety. Here's the way in which salvation can come. Here's how it is that we can benefit from the salvation that God is offering to us. And rather than saying, well, couldn't I use a blue cord? Do we really all have to be here? Couldn't I just kind of tell you, here, I'll draw you a map, take the map back with you, and I'll mark which houses that you should live, right? And you say, that'd be silly. How silly that would be for Rahab to start making demands of these men who are offering her salvation from a challenge that she's already admitted she knows is coming. And sometimes it amazes me spiritually how people will admit they know Jesus is returning. They acknowledge, they believe in that He is coming back. But they're constantly trying to say, well, can't we do this, or this? Won't this be good enough or that be good enough? Why not just say, so be it? What Jesus has said, so be it. That's the salvation I'm looking for. Maybe you're outside of Christ tonight. Maybe you need to get into His house. The only place of security. Be in His body. Know the benefits of salvation that comes by being in Him. Maybe you've left Him. Maybe you once were in that house, but you decided, well, there's some other place I'd rather be, and we go outside the doors. And I encourage you to think soberly about that decision and get back in the house. No matter what noise might be going on around it, get back in the house where God says the true security is. Can we help you, strengthen you, pray for you, assist you in any way spiritually tonight? We invite you even now to come while we stand and while we sing.